Hello students, this is your instructor for Business 210, Lee Moore. The presentation is Recognizing Nonverbal Communication. This is the video for your Week 1 Check Your Understanding. At the completion of the video, please go into the Check Your Understanding quiz and complete the questions. As we communicate as part of our interpersonal relationships with others, one of the areas that we don't always pay close attention to are nonverbal messages. Now, nonverbal messages are any of those messages, any content within our message that's not verbal. For instance, it can be your facial expressions, it can be your pitch or tone of voice, it can be your body language or your body posture. There are so many different things that are involved when we look at nonverbal communication. Now, nonverbal communication is the primary way that we communicate our feelings and our attitudes and our emotions. Very many people see nonverbal communication as being more reliable than verbal communication, trusting the nonverbal communication cues that we often display. Up to 93% of all communication is nonverbal, with only 7% being verbal. This should show you how important nonverbal communication is. Now, nonverbal communication is continuous. It means that there's not a start point or a stop point for nonverbal communication. We don't decide to go into a nonverbal communication mode. It's something that we do naturally. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't control it, because indeed we can. We also have to watch that we don't put too much faith in nonverbal communications as we're receiving them, because many times they can be ambiguous. Is that person crossing their arms because they're taking on a closed posture, because they don't want to listen to our message? Or are they crossing their arms because they're cold? When we say that nonverbal communication is often cultural, we're talking about the way that different cultures may interpret the nonverbal communication cues that you may present or that they may present to you. For instance, the gestures that you use, your body language, the way that you speak, eye contact. All of these are based upon rules that different cultures have, their social norms. Nonverbal communication also differs by gender. When we look at the way that women communicate nonverbally, they're more likely to adapt to the nonverbal interaction patterns of their partner. They're more likely to mirror the person that they're speaking with. They receive more eye contact from others. They smile more. They approach and are approached more closely. They're also touched more often and associate touch with warmth and expressiveness from other women. However, from men, that's not always the case. With men, we usually use more expansive gestures. We're more likely to stare at someone. We also tend to require more space around us, and we're more likely to initiate touch with others. Now, nonverbal communication can be controlled, which means that if you find yourself either based upon feedback from others or from your own observations that your nonverbal communication cues do not match what it is you're trying to say, the message that you're trying to communicate, you can work on making sure that your nonverbal cues meet your verbal expectations. The primary method that we have for expressing our emotions, the type of emotions we're feeling, and the intensity are through our facial expressions. There are over 250,000 facial expressions that most of us aren't even aware of. But many of these we can control throughout the communication process. One of the most important is eye contact. Eye contact is especially important with nonverbal communication because of the way that it helps us to deliver our message. Now, the rules for eye contact differ in different cultures. What may be all right to do in one country isn't necessarily okay to do in another. You may have a culture where eye contact is acceptable and expected, like here in America, or in another country where eye contact means that you're either challenging that person or maybe you're showing a lack of respect. Some expressions, of course, are cross-cultural. There are also micro-expressions. When we look at micro-expressions, these are the the expressions that are minutely displayed on her face only for a microsecond. In fact, interrogators, police, many times they will record you while you're making a statement in order to see your micro expressions that they play back later, slow motion. Facial expressions are contagious. We can see that there may be a universal basis for interpreting facial expressions. We know that complex facial expressions are easier to interpret than simple ones. In fact, it's very likely that you could spot a phony smile just because of the experiences that you've had during your lifetime. Research has shown us that there are 7 universal facial expressions of emotion, which means, of course, that it doesn't matter the culture you're in, you're probably going to see these facial expressions which are associated with the emotion that they may be feeling at that time. For instance, happiness, surprise, contempt, sadness, fear, disgust, and anger. Now, while these facial expressions may be universal, the rules for expressing these, especially in public, may be entirely different. Gestures and posture often include the movement of our hands and body, as well as the positioning of our body. Gestures can be cultural. For instance, if I make the OK sign in America, that's something that's positive. If I use this same OK gesture in Italy, it means something entirely different. And it probably means that you don't want to use it on your travels to Italy. Gestures can be used for illustration. For instance, if I'm speaking to a class and I'm at the podium and I pound on the podium with my fist, it's not just to make noise, it is to get their attention, but it's to show how important that point is. When we look at posture, this can be either while we're standing up or while we're seated. So whether we're talking to someone standing next to them or whether we're sitting at a meeting table. Posture can show whether we're open to suggestion or if we're closed to suggestion. If we sit with our arms crossed, if we sit leaning back, if we sit leaning forward, any of these positions can show that our posture is either open or closed. Now, likewise, when we look at posture, it can be interpreted correctly or it may be misinterpreted. These are a few different examples of gestures and posture. It's important to know that how we deliver a message can be more important than what we actually say in that message. Again, that goes back to the 93% of all communication is nonverbal. One of those nonverbal cues are our vocal characteristics. Now, voice can carry both intentional and unintentional messages. So we have to be very careful about how we deliver our message. Now, fortunately for us, vocal cues can be controlled. When we look at vocal cues, we're talking about pitch, high, low. We're looking at pace. Is it a slow pace? Is it a speedy pace? And of course, the way that we stress different words in different parts of our message. Likewise, silence speaks volumes. Now, we use our vocal cues to communicate emotions, to help us manage conversations, and it's just a very large part of who we are and how we communicate. When it comes to personal appearance, we really have to think about what the social norms are within the business world. When we look at how others see us, they can look at us, and most people are going to judge the book by the cover. So they can judge us fairly as well as judge us unfairly. Some of the things that people look at when they consider body appearance are body size and shape. Now, unfortunately, we don't have very much control over body size and shape, but there are other areas that we can. For instance, hairstyle and grooming. Do you want to have a business cut, or are you going to wear spikes to school or to work? Likewise, we look at body personalization. This is an area that many people are concerned with, and it upsets a lot of people. When we look at body personalization, what we're looking at are tattoos, piercings, jewelry. The rules, of course, that we want to adhere by are those rules that are considered to be professional, not just by profession, but also by the company that we work for. Now, one area that we also really want to pay attention to is clothing. We want to make sure that we dress for success while at the same time wearing appropriate clothing for our career field. Again, some of the factors of personal appearance are controllable while others aren't. Because touch is so very powerful, we have to be very careful how we use it. It can be used to assert authority, to imply intimacy, or to show our emotions, like we see in the picture of President Obama. Touch conveys warmth, comfort, and reassurance in many instances. Touch is cultural, meaning that different cultures use touch in different fashions. In most cultures, you don't touch a person unless you know them, and the way you touch them and the rules of when you touch them differ. There are also gender differences, which we must take care of as well. Touch can be misinterpreted, so whenever you find yourself in doubt, the best rule of thumb is don't touch. Time and space are also very important nonverbal communication cues. Time can be used to show your position of superiority or your position of authority. Many times this is manifested by the boss making the employee wait for them. Chances are we won't see that working if it's vice versa. Space can also be used to mark territory. In fact, you may find yourself when you go into the room on the first day, you pick your chair. You go into the classroom on the second day. If someone's sitting in that seat, you may find yourself irritated. Likewise, you may find yourself getting up from a chair and marking your territory with your book or your book bag. Space can also be used to indicate intimacy. It can be used to indicate respect or lack of respect. And we also see that the use of time and space is very cultural. This is a depiction of space in American culture. Intimate space reserved for those people you're intimate with, either your close friends or your family members or significant other, is from 0 to 1.5 feet. Personal space, which is usually reserved for close friends and family members as well. Maybe those friends aren't or family members aren't quite as close. And this area is reserved from 1.5 to 4 feet. Social space is 4 feet to 12 feet, and this is where you're going to find yourself in the classroom with your other classmates. And then public space, when you're out in the public, this is usually 12 feet and beyond. We already know the importance of nonverbal communication, but can we use it in electronic communication? And the answer is yes. We can do this in emails, text, and instant messaging by using emoticons, which are pictographs more than anything else, a smiley face with a sad face, for instance. We can use punctuation. We can use capitalization, which is usually interpreted as shouting at someone, so you want to be careful about using this. Underlining brings attention to the areas that you have underlined. The same thing with italics and bold print. Red print means you really want to call attention to it. Now, if you're speaking to a person and you're underlining it, placing it in italics in bold print, and it's red, this can mean that the message is very powerful, and the way that the other person may interpret it may be in a negative fashion. Now, we can also show nonverbal communication by message length, response time, and media choice. Message length, is it long or short? Does it mean that we're really going in detail because we may not believe that person understands our message fully? Or is it a message length that tells the other person that we know that they know what they're doing and we're just reminding them? Likewise with response time. If I have a short response time, chances are the person is going to be thinking that I am on the ball, that I am answering the message right away because I'm important. Likewise, if the response time takes a while, like 2 or 3 days, it might be because we don't see your message as being as important, or that person may not see a reasonable response or know how to answer in response. This can sometimes be seen as negative. And then, of course, media choice. It's very important for the other person to understand why you're using the media choice that you are. Today, we've visited the importance of recognizing nonverbal communication, especially when we look at facial expressions, our gestures and posture, our vocal characteristics, how we appear to other people, our use of touch, time, and space, and how we can use nonverbal communication in electronic communication. After you've completed watching this video, please go to the Week 1 Check Your Understanding quiz and complete it. Thank you.